This video is sponsored by Squarespace. The looming question for any low-budget film that catches fire at the box office is, so how about a sequel? But that's only the first question. Do you return with the old cast of characters and creative team, or do you go a new direction? Do you continue the story you left off in the first film, or do you create something new? All of these questions and more were asked for 28 Weeks Later, the sequel to 28 Days Later. Were these questions answered successfully? Well, let's get into the story of the production of
28 Days Later was a new benchmark in terms of the horror movie.
I don't think you start out trying to make a franchise or a sequel to the movie, but it seemed so obvious that if somebody could come up with a decent idea, it seemed like a really good opportunity.
This didn't materialize at first, however. The film's writer Alex Garland went on to write his second novel, The Coma, while director Danny Boyle went on to direct an unrelated film called Millions, both releasing in 2004. Boyle and Garland and the original film's producer Andrew McDonald then reunited for their next project, but it wasn't themed around 28 Days. Instead, it was a sci-fi thriller called Sunshine. During Sunshine's production process, though, they did start to brainstorm what a successor to 28 Days could look like. They started by mulling over a more direct sequel that they called 29 Days Later, set around the same period as the original film.
There was an idea that it was to take place in the 28 days between the original outbreak and when the first film started, and it was all going to be about a team of British Marines trying to rescue the Prime Minister and the Queen, and we had all these different ideas for films.
But they ultimately decided to frame it as an aftermath, set long after the original outbreak, with an attempt to rebuild a small part of London in an otherwise destroyed UK. With the outbreak wiped out, as Major West from the first film predicted, the infected simply starve and die as the virus has killed off their survival instincts.
The main concept we had in mind is not to repeat the first idea, which was a fantastic idea with Danny Boyle and Alex Garland. I think this one is more about surviving. It's a survival film. The nation is rebuilding.
It's got a very good idea in it, Boyle said. The idea is that Britain has been emptied. There's nobody there. It's completely dead. And 6 months later, the Americans arrived to reboot it back up again, particularly the franchises, obviously. But with their commitments to Sunshine, Boyle and Garland decided to take a backseat as executive producers, with only McDonald staying in his original role. But it would seem Boyle would step in to direct some specific scenes while also producing the film. Boyle has also been connected specifically to be the director of the opening sequence, which kind of makes sense.
That's what Danny achieves time after time. He's not trying to make a name for himself in any way. He's there to serve the project like we all are.
Well done, everyone. Well done, Inspector.
To replace him, they hired writer Rowan Joffe for the original draft, and then recruited director Juan Carlos Fresnadillo, who Boyle discovered through his film Intacto. Fresnadillo then took on a writer-director role, rewriting the script together with two other collaborators, Enrique Lopez Levin and Jesus Olmo.
Juan Carlos Fresnadillo was a great man to hand the baton on to.
Thank you, Danny.
The drafts of the film each had the through line of a family theme, and in a break from the first film, they decided to show the entire outbreak from the very beginning, with this family as the instigator. While the original virus took inspiration primarily from rabies, the sequel looked to other diseases like AIDS for an invisible mutation of the virus, surviving through an immune carrier.
And it's an interesting thing again because it's sort of based on some kind of fact. With, serious blood diseases like AIDS, some people can become immune to it. And that's how we sort of based it on.
Boyle added, "It won't be the people who were in the first one. They're too busy. Naomi Harris is doing the sequels to Pirates of the Caribbean, and Cillian Murphy is in Batman Begins. They're doing really well, so good luck to them, really." And although they would have a great cast with actors like Robert Carlyle, Idris Elba, and Jeremy Renner to round out the cast, what they found hardest to cast for this film was the children.
The casting of this film was all about the family, the central family. And it was all about finding two kids and the father and the mother. And then we also had to cast an American side. We started with the kids, really, because they took the longest time, because you have to find them. A lot of searching in schools and stuff.
I missed you so much.
Our sponsor Squarespace is also introducing us to a new way of designing a website with its new design intelligence. And it's a lot easier than learning how to play chess. The cutting-edge AI technology helps you to create a website that fits your preferred style and brand, but without you having to do all the heavy lifting. With dynamic dashboards, website copy, product descriptions, and a whole lot more, this helps you to easily build a professional, great-looking website to drive clients or customers to. And with Squarespace Payments, you can manage all of your payments in one place with methods like Klarna, ACH Direct Debit, Apple Pay, and more. You can even collect invoice payments from your clients through Squarespace as well, keeping everything in one location. So be sure to try out the awesome new design intelligence system now at squarespace.com. And when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/FrameVoyager to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code FrameVoyager. Production began on September 1st, 2006, again, getting started in London. But that is perhaps where the similarities between the two films end. The thing with most classics is that you often cannot replicate them, nor can you easily surpass them. 28 Weeks Later had much of the same problem. How can you one-up the scenes of a deserted London? The wonder as to where all the people have gone. The surprise of finding out what happened is not the main draw of the sequel anymore, as that side of the story has already been fully exhausted. What 28 Weeks instead did was action.
28 Weeks Later, there's more action, there's more jumps, there's less suspense in the first film.
Similar to the Alien franchise, which you can of course check out our series on that as well. The 28 series saw a similar step taken from movie 1 to movie 2. The first is more suspenseful and slower, while the second is an all-out action flick. What makes up the horror of the rage virus was already explored in the prior movie, which gave the team more of a license to experiment the premise further.
One of the new things in this sequel is, for the first time, you're tracking one infected character.
Much of the visual identity of the movie was already figured out in the previous entry. However, 28 Weeks Later made some interesting alterations to their gear. Instead of relying on the trusty, if not somewhat basic, Canon XR1s, we got Arri Flex cameras, an Arri Cam, a Sony HVR Z1E, and an Aton A Minima. This is quite the departure from the previous movie, which solely relied on digital video. Whereas for the sequel, the movie was acquired not only using MPEG-2 digital video on mini DV tapes, but also on 16mm film and 35mm film. In the end, the experimental stage of the series had run its course. Or did it? While the early digital nerds may breathe a sigh of disappointment, there are still a lot of interesting things to point out in this movie's production, especially when it pertains to the new cinematographer's camera operation style. From low and steady to clasping that thing by his fingertips, Enrique Chediak used this camera in interesting ways, sometimes even in ways which many would decry to be wrong. While the previous movie experimented with shutter speeds and digital cameras, 28 Weeks Later is filled with shaky cam footage, very shaky footage. Which is where, if we look behind the scenes, we can observe how Enrique pulled this look off, by holding his camera in the least stable manner that is humanly possible. Indoors, he would slim down his rig, essentially just holding a little box in his hands, which he would whip around from point to point, sometimes creeping towards the subject and shoving the camera right into the action, while at other times he would have a bigger rig, holding the camera near the lens and clasping it at the film mag, sprinting right behind the actors without a care in the world when it pertained to stabilizing the camera. The resulting footage is exceedingly chaotic and a bit of a smeary mess.
I think that's partly because we wanted to look realistic. We wanted to feel sort of believable.
There are some big cinematographic differences between the first and second movies. For one, 28 Days Later didn't really care to portray itself as some sort of documentary a lot of the time. While it doesn't look quite cinematic when compared to other movies in its genre, much of the time the handheld footage is stable enough with a drastically reduced shutter speed, or the shots have been achieved using a tripod mount or some other thing to stabilize it. The sequel has many such scenes too. However, what is often spliced between such shots is the smeariest, most unstable camera operating you have ever seen, which works wonders for the chaos going all throughout the movie. Stuttery and frantic moments of clarity juxtaposed with what can only be described as a helter-skelter of smear frames and raw movements.
The style of the documentary, delivering and conveying something real, on the other hand, is so difficult to shoot in that way. You need a lot of cameras, handheld style.
Carlos's challenge, though, was in making a movie that had a bit of a constricted budget. Like the first movie, not that much money was available for the team to make use of, which translated into using gear wisely and maybe not going too overboard with special effects.
Both the films have been very difficult to make because they've been reasonably low budget, filming in London and trying to do something a bit different. There've been a lot of railways, undergrounds, major sites, gas attacks, helicopters falling apart. It's been really difficult.
And also, like the first film, the actors felt a bit of unease at the empty London streets. And this was perhaps something that feels a bit foreign to us now, because we've lived through that sort of visual experience during the COVID pandemic. But at this time, no one had ever seen these areas look completely shuttered and fully abandoned. In this film, we certainly get a more in-depth look at the zombies, and the people playing the zombies definitely had a lot of energy.
I start slamming his head off the floor and then eating him and ripping out his lung. Man, gotta be my chance. You gotta
a zombie movie many times is only as good as the zombies. And the sprinting, raging infected of 28 weeks later, the audience got so much of them to see. Quite a lot of extras were used for the film, dressed in torn clothes and prepped for action by being drenched with various liquids.
We just dyed them, broke them down and made them dirty to try and explain, thinking how far they might have had to fight or run or sweat. So we used glycerine for sweat and, spray them all down. And then we just sort of worked with different types of blood. We'll put a thick, dark, black colour on, and then we put some nice fresh red around the neck.
And the zombies often had a good mouthful of blood before every take.
They've all got fresh blood in their mouths that the makeup gives to them. And so that sort of spits out and comes down their front as well.
Looks alone do not make zombies. Movement and sound really are what sell the performance, which is why the zombies typically weren't depicted by your average person. All of the extras had some form of background in a movement-related vocation, such as ballet dancers, gymnasts, or other kinds of athletics. They also needed some time to really get into the role through movement coaching and a gym before ever getting done up with scary-looking contacts or being brushed with an abundance of paints. Even though the zombies' sound was in some form directed, trying to achieve a more animalistic sound for the zombies. But by keeping the definition of animalistic vague, the extras came with their own ghastly and pained vocalizations, making the sounds of the infected a disturbing and believing orchestra of screams and grunts. The zombies also make a real impact on the actors, while some keep cracking up.
And I have these people chasing behind me, and I'm giggling. I have a smile ear to ear, like, God, you're not supposed to be laughing. I'm like, well, come on, it's funny, man.
For others, the extras are legitimately terrifying once the camera rolls.
Obviously, when they're all made up and in costume, it doesn't seem real, but when you're actually doing it and they're behind you and making the noises, it's really shocking. It's scary stuff.
This is in part due to the movement of the extras not just being random, but rather choreographed. And combined with their scary makeup and incredibly kinetic performances, the actors didn't have to imagine being chased by undead nightmares too much, because it felt like they really were. As they were being chased around a lot, it made the movie tiring to shoot. Everyone ran from point A to point B, and with the movie being made up of many action sequences, shooting day looked like a zombie-themed cardio workout again and again. Of course, 28 weeks later was bloody, and while the budget was low, the team figured out cheap effects that looked bloody convincing on screen. How about peeled tomatoes for brains, or reusable rubber zombie doubles which can be sliced and diced? And there also is that gruesome makeup work.
When I saw sort of like the bites and the blood and the contact lenses and the they did a really fantastic job. It just looks so real.
I think it is pretty safe to say the zombies of 28 weeks later really live up to the audience's expectations. The film would release on May 11th, 2007 and would go on to make up to $64.2 million at the box office. A nice return against its $15 million budget, and that really boded well for the continuation of the franchise, as the studio would confirm the talks for a sequel with Danny Boyle in 2007, saying that the story had been mapped out. It all seemed like it was coming together for another installment soon, but in the end, the third installment would have to wait nearly 2 decades for the next film. And you can hear about the story of that production of 28 years later right here.